Hello, everyone. This is Stephen, and welcome to Democracy Demythologized. Today, I'm talking with Michael Albrecht, who is a social media scholar. He wrote the book Trumping the Media, trying to analyze how Donald Trump used media to gather a following. Today, we're talking about how social media is influencing politics and what it might look like, what politics might look like in the current social media era. We also talk about what seems to be similar or different in this Trump's second term, about how the media is responding. So I guess without further ado, let's get started. I hope you enjoy. Hello, everyone. I'm here with Dr. Michael Albrecht. Mike, how are you doing today?
I'm doing all right. It's a very warm day in South Florida.
Yes, I bet it is. I mean, it's very much the heat of the summer. I guess as we're recording this in early August. So you wrote the book, Trumping the Media. Have done a lot of analysis as a communication scholar, talking about trying to understand political discourse, including particularly some of the stuff going on with Donald Trump. And I guess this is the kind of the key question of going on right now is what the heck is going on? So maybe I guess this is starting at a bit of a high level, but we're 6 or 7 months, so many months into the second Trump presidency. What are your thoughts as somebody who studies these things?
Well, if one of the things that I see is different between the first time and the second time, and I'm not the first person to say this or anything, is that the first time Trump had all these things he really wanted to do, but wasn't exactly sure how to execute them. And so he would often put out some big ideas and it would come to nothing, or he'd fire people sort of willy-nilly because they weren't doing what he wanted to do, but he didn't know how to manipulate the levers of power in the same way he does this time. This time, he seems to have a plan that Project 2025 that he assured us during the last election had nothing to do with is pretty much the game plan for what he's doing. So you can sort of see, he's not firing his staff willy-nilly. He has the same people. He hired all loyalists. And he's really going after these centers of power. What he really wants to do is he really wants to gut the government. And he's not new in doing this. Putin is probably the one who did it the most. But Erdogan in Turkey, Orban in Hungary, and others have taken this model, and it's sort of an usually when we think of authoritative leaderships, we think of Hannah Arendt, and she coined the term totalitarianism, which are these governments where the government is part of your everyday life. So fascism and Stalinism were the two she was grappling with at the time. But this form of authoritarianism is a little bit different in that it's trying to make government so small that that you can't trust it to do anything. You can't rely upon it for health. So he's got someone who's trying to dismantle health. You can't rely upon it for weather. So he's trying to get someone to dismantle weather. You can't rely upon it for any of these various things. That it's sort of the opposite direction, where in Stalin's Russia, the government would tell you all of those things. This is your health. This is what you should eat. These are the jobs you should have. This is the weather. And this is sort of the opposite of, if nobody really knows what's going on and there's no truth, then the government can sort of make all of these kind of shady deals. So that's, I think, what's going on. I don't think he wants to get people. There's part of him that loves the pomp and the circumstance of Hitler and Mussolini and those kind of figures. But I don't think he has a country that's ready for that. So I think he prefers to, or he's taken to the fact, I can have all this power and I can accumulate wealth, by doing these other things that are dismantling the government. And that's what Putin did. Some people think Putin is the richest person in the world. It's hard to gauge that because he doesn't keep real, the books aren't open. But people think that Putin has used his authoritarian nature and his it's been 25 years since he's come to power, to accumulate vast amounts of wealth. A lot of it is hidden, and in part because he doesn't government money goes to Putin. It doesn't go to things you usually associate government with. Mm-hmm. So that goes in lots of directions, but I don't know. If you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, this makes total sense. This reminds me, I previously interviewed another scholar by the name of Benjamin Studebaker, and he has this idea of, he kind of has two forms of totalitarianism that are two ends of the spectrum, and maybe they actually kind of coincide in the extremes, but he has maybe authoritarianism and like a rule-based totalitarianism. So rule-based totalitarianism is like the process dictates everything. You can't do anything except through the process, and the process is what rules our lives. And then you have something like authoritarianism, which is basically all power is vested in that one person. Maybe you have a personality cult kind of idea, and what that person says goes. It seems like, from this is what I was thinking about with what you were saying. It seems like Trump is much more on that side of authoritarianism. And I guess one tension I've had with Donald Trump is, to what extent he's trying to accrue power. Is he trying to accrue power to like take over? Or to what extent is he trying to accrue power just for personal ends? Or to what extent is he just trying to like you said, to enrich himself? Or to what extent is he just accruing power and there isn't really a goal? And it just kind of is, you know what I mean? Like, I guess I'm somewhere in the second two as the most dominant, but I think there's a bit of all three. Or what do you think?
Yeah, I think it would be, if Trump had a little bit more of a specific ideology, then I think it would be easier to make those decisions of, this is what he's trying to do. Hitler and Stalin both had a large plan of like, this is what we want to do. This is like, the cult of personality was a means to getting those ends. For Trump, his cult of personality is like, well, that's really what he wants. He wants to be the most adored person in history. He wants to be on Mount Rushmore. He wants to be on the $100 bill. He wants to be named the Kennedy Center after. And he sees that people have been named, like, we named that after Kennedy, so Kennedy must have been great. So he says, well, what if I just change it to my name? And Stalin did that, but I think Stalin did that towards a larger aim, that he thought that this is the way the world should work. Where Trump just says, I don't think he has an idea of how the world should work. His ideology basically boils down to, I think tariffs are good, I don't like windmills, and I'm the smartest person in the room. Like, that's sort of, anything else beyond that seems to be, and I should be able to go after anyone who has slighted me at any point in the past. I just realized that someone was posting about Pritzker, the guy who's the governor of Illinois right now, who's going to make the news, and I imagine he's running for president. But Trump has a feud with him going back to the 70s and 80s because they were both in the building of hotels business. And so if anyone, like, this is why he brought up Rosie O'Donnell, who hasn't been in the news in 25 years, but like, he's still mad at her because she said something 20 years ago, and he has to revenge those slights. That's not really a healthy way to run a country. And it can put someone with an idea who had a strong ideology in some difficult situations, but he doesn't have that. Just going back to something you said, I really like the idea of thinking about this as process versus result. Trump does not care for the process. Like, he doesn't. He has no. He doesn't. That's not really what concerns him. He just wants to get something done. Apparently, that's how he ran his businesses. I'm just going to find a way of getting something done. But if you think about Hitler had, like, we had the Hitler Youth. So our process is, we're going to take these kids and we're going to turn them into true believers, right? And anybody else, we're going to move to a different place. And it was a whole, from cradle to grave kind of, this is how you're going to become a Nazi. Whereas Trump does not have that kind of process. He doesn't have time for that kind of process. He's never thought through these things in a smart way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, this makes total sense. And one thing it does seem like Trump does care about, and you talk quite a bit about this in your book, which was about the first Trump presidency. This one hadn't happened yet when you published it. But it seems like, and you were hinting at this, Trump cares about his image. Trump cares about how he's portrayed. And he does, like, you talk about in the book how he revamps communication, and how he kind of creates this environment for his followers who just kind of listen to everything he says, and maybe even uses himself as a villain with those of us who are maybe a bit more in touch with reality to kind of prop himself up as in this communication chamber. Can maybe because what you said, Trump seems to mostly care about himself. How, in your experience when you were looking into it, how has he done this in his first term? And then maybe we can come to the second term and talk about how that's similar or different.
Cool. Well, this is a little bit easier for me to talk about because this is where I did the majority of my research. So thanks for circling back, as they say. One thing I think Trump is that I say in my book a lot, that Trump was really good at, smart might not be the word, but it's sort of, he's very intuitive, and he very much intuits how new technologies are being used. So I have a chapter that's all about FM talk radio, mostly on the conservative side of things, but also Howard Stern, who's, I don't know where he is politically. He did run for president as a libertarian, so maybe that's his view. But Trump did hours and hours and hours on the Howard Stern show, and he did all of these call-ins to various Fox News shows, and so he figured out how to use that medium of that Rush Limbaugh is sort of the king of, and sort of like, oh, I can do that. I can do that in a different kind of way. I can bully people. I can talk down to people. I can do it in a way that people say, oh, they're just kidding. It's just fun. Like, we're just having a laugh. And the scary part of that is if you ever criticize them, they're just saying, wait a minute, you can't take a joke. And so Trump was able to do that. And that's just one example. And I talk about how he used Twitter and he was a very early adopter of Twitter, and was on Twitter until they said he couldn't do it anymore. This was before Musk had taken over Twitter. He was banned from the site, and for his white nationalist impulses. One of the reasons I'm no longer on Twitter, I know a lot of people aren't on Twitter these days, is because it has become, once Musk came back and let the white nationalists back on, it's hard to avoid. And for someone like me, like, I'd love to have various points of views. I actually very much like reading right-wing takes on things. I watch more Fox News than I should. But once it sort of starts veering into like, oh, this is actual Nazi propaganda, I don't need that coming into my feed all over the place. Some people have more of a stomach and have written some great books on that. But I was just like, I got to get off of this. But in my book, I talk about basically, so I talk about how he did talk radio. I talk about television. I talk about the Twitter, and reality television was a new way of examining television. And of course, Trump was very good at that, because he had his show for over a decade and came to see like, oh, it doesn't really make a difference what the plot is about. What makes a difference is having conflict, having winners and losers, having people who are cool characters, interesting characters that you want to have back. And it's one of the reasons that he's stocked his cabinet this time with people who are from Fox News. They're just reality show. Literally, Sean Casey, I think that's his name, maybe I'm getting it wrong, was on The Real World. He's the guy who's the transportation secretary. If I have his last name wrong, his name is Sean, but I can't remember his last name, but I want to say Casey. Anyway, he was literally from the world of reality TV. He also took people who were literally from Fox News, and that's sort of his. He really enjoys that style of interaction. Fox News was able to take news and make it more entertaining, whether or not you agree with it or disagree with it. There's bells, there's whistles, there's people shouting at each other. It's hard to not watch it. And he says, well, what if we did that and made it like a presidency? And so there's a really good article out there, if you want a good one, about how he looked at P.T. Barnum and said, aha, that's the guy. Like, most people see P.T. Barnum and they're like, oh, that guy's a huckster. But Trump's like, that guy's is what America is, and I want to try and embody that. The show is the thing that's the most important. And going back to the first question, if in his first administration he was all show with very little substance, this time he sort of figured out the substance and the show and how they work together. Anyways, that went in several different directions, but I don't know if you have anything on that.
Yeah, well, everything you're saying makes total sense. One quick side before I go into the heat of what you're saying. There are times with I'm going to say political communication scholars like you. I don't always envy. I sometimes look at you guys' work and I'm like, oh, I bet their social media feed is just really messed up. Because you guys have to put your pulse in. You were talking about watching a lot of Fox News. You probably have to watch a lot of very questionable content to understand it, to understand what's going on. Maybe even go to parts of the web that are even worse than Fox News. And in some ways, I feel like you guys get the messed up feed, so we don't have to. So we can listen to you guys and not have to explore it in depth to understand it ourselves. But yeah. So I guess everything you're saying makes total sense. I mean, Donald Trump does seem like a penultimate reality star president. And it seems like he has all media is good media, all attention is good attention. And with P.T. Barnum, I mean, P.T. Barnum was a quintessential hustler. And one thing that I think kind of puzzles me, and you do seem to have more of a pulse on this, so this is why I'm asking, is why is this successful? Why do you think, like, he routinely touts lies, but is still able to have like a cult following? And it seems like not just even in spite of his lies, but almost because of that. Like, why do you think this works?
That's a really interesting question. Just as an aside, to go back to the first thing you mentioned, I do have the research can get a little rough if you're talking about some of these things, and I chose the easy way out. I have a chapter that's on 4chan and 8chan and all of the different things, and that's where a lot of the sort of darker part of the web was percolating in the Obama administration and the early Trump administration, and I relied almost exclusively on secondhand. Other people had gone to I didn't actually go to 4chan very much, which probably saved my sanity a little. I just read what other scholars had done and said, well, they seemed like they did a really good job. I'm just going to do a meta-analysis. So that's one way of avoiding that. But someone has to do that work, and I'm really grateful for the people who are doing that. And there's some great scholars that are working on the manosphere and who are working on all of those things. But the question of why it's successful, I think one way is to look historically, is people ask why Hitler was able to gain power. And Hitler was able to gain power not because he had a majority of the people like him. Trump has still never quite had a majority, although that's, with only about 60% of people voting, it's hard to tell if he has a majority or not. But I think Hitler had something like 30-something% of the vote and was able to take power, in part because the people he was fighting didn't have any spine. Mm-hmm. And so if you put Trump up against marginal politicians who are just reading DNC talking points, or keep your Chuck Schumers of the world, who don't have strong personalities, who are mostly interested in preserving their own political future. Those types of people he walks over. If you remember in the Republican debates in 2016, you had all of these professional politicians, Rubio, Scott Walker, all of these people who had run big states and were seen as like, oh, these are the people. Jeb Bush was in that one, and they're like, oh, and he's destroyed them because they wanted to keep on their talking points, and they had this. They couldn't see that something new was going on. So there are some Dems right now who are starting to see it. I think I just said Pritzker, but AOC is, of course, someone who's always willing to go after him. And you can see these moments. Like there was a moment last summer when Tim Walz was actually calling Republicans and MAGA folks weird, and it was getting some traction. And then you could watch as the Democratic establishment said, well, we don't want that. We want you to talk about kitchen table issues. And so you have the Carvels of the world, and those people come in and sort of are constantly getting these other candidates to act like puppets. And it seems to me there is a hunger on the part of the people for someone who has a little bit more authenticity, which is a very different thing than telling the truth. You can be very authentic and lie. Just historically, a great figure of this is Bob Dylan. People often see Bob Dylan as like the quintessential marker of authenticity. But if you go back and you watch any of his old, especially in the 60s and 70s, his interviews, he was always lying. He was saying, he said he was riding the rails. I can put those two words together. He was doing that before he was a musician, and he never talked about his family in Minnesota, and he was always sort of concocting these things. And his autobiography is actually sort of literally plagiarized from other people who have written stories about him. So it's not really coming from him. But yet people still loved and fawned over. So people don't care that Trump is telling the truth. I mean, I sort of do. But most people, I don't think, but they care that he's being authentic. Whatever that means, I think he's authentically kind of crass and unlikable. But for a lot of people, they like that. They like the sort of tough guy persona that he has. So those are some of the reasons. I think we're also, I think, a little bit less attached to truth than we might once have been. People who study reality television talk about the fact that at the beginning, people were like, why would you want to watch this? It's obviously staged. And now reality TV has been on TV for 25 years. And of course we want to watch it. We want to watch it because it's staged. It is good theater. It's fun. I enjoy watching, what was the one I was just watching? I was just watching one of them. And I'm like, oh, this is just great fun. I like Temptation Island. It's my favorite. But others can do what they want. And it's because these people are interacting in a way that makes it seem like, oh, they're interesting, cool. And I hate to say that Trump is interesting and cool, but I do know that lots of people find him that way. And so if you try to attack him by just fact checking, as Democrats sometimes tend to do, you're not going to get anywhere because the actual underlying truth doesn't really matter, I think.
Yeah, this makes total sense. I mean, what I know this might be a hard question to answer, but what do you think authenticity means in this context? It seems like maybe kind of spitballing an initial idea that authenticity has to do with a cohesive narrative, where the narrative at least feels like it checks with reality, that the narrative says something useful about the world in which we live. Like that's something about that is what authenticity. I mean, that might be what Bob Dylan's stories about himself, even if they were factually wrong, they still told a story about that was cohesive, that said something about what it meant to be about U.S. society at that time, right? Or what do you think authenticity is?
I don't know if you Google scholared me, but if you were, you would realize my dissertation is written on authenticity. So
Perfect.
That's put me right in a direction that I've thought a lot about. And when you were explaining it, you said authenticity is a feeling, and I think that's rather than a fact. So if you think of things as being either rational or irrational, authenticity is often a very irrational thing. So even though someone might not be authentic, they can feel very authentic. So I point to someone like Dylan as being an example of that, or someone like Springsteen, who is like, all right, I have spent all of these years of my life. He himself never worked a working class job. He himself didn't like work in the factory and get fired and all the things we associate Bruce Springsteen with. But he was able to, as you astutely said, turn that into a cohesive narrative. Like, oh, here's a guy who's going to sing for those people in a way that's going to make them say, like, yeah, you're talking about me. And it's not just that you're talking about me, you're doing it in a way that makes you feel like you very plausibly could be talking about me, right? You could be putting on blue jeans and a red work hat and throwing a baseball in a backyard like he was doing on the cover of Born in the USA. Like, that's, even if he wasn't actually doing those things, the fact that we're like, oh, we can, the narrative is cohesive, and that makes songs when he sings about those things. When he sings Born in the USA, which is about someone who loses their job at the factory and goes to war and all those things, that he's like, oh, I get it, I feel this. And so authenticity is you're constantly working to construct it. But this idea that people have a front stage and a backstage, and for example, when I was applying for professor jobs when I was younger, I was pretty young when I first started. I was in my young 30s, and so I wanted to make sure that I seemed like a professor. So I would go into the interview with a corduroy jacket with patches on the sleeve, so that I could like, oh, well, even though this is a young guy, but like he's got a beard, he's got patches on his sleeve. He's a professor. He's acting like a professor. He's filling that role, and it makes you feel like, oh, he could very well teach a class. There's all kinds of problematic things about that involve gender and race and a whole bunch of other things that's beyond the topic of this. But that if you can get people to feel like oh, that's you are the thing, and Trump sort of does that in terms of like, oh, I'm a straight shooting, I'm one of you, and this is the trick, and I don't know if I can quite do this, explain why, but I'll give it a shot. The trick that Trump does is he, who is a multimillionaire, if not a billionaire, his base tend to be people who are not the poorest of society, but that are working class, right? That people have jobs who are like just above the sort of people who might need to be on social safety nets. And if in answer to why I think it's this, is I think that he has this grudge of he did not grow up in Manhattan. He wanted to be one of the big Manhattan bigwigs. He wanted to be like all these other people who are building the tallest buildings in the world and who are controlling them. And he was just outsider guy from an outer borough with kind of a thick accent. So he was never able to, like, people had their fancy art in their apartments, and he had his gilded in gold. Like his stuff is so tacky. By the New York elite would say, like, oh my God, everything is gold and ugly. And the fact that he always said they're looking down at me. So he takes the people who are saying, oh, you know who's looking down at you? The liberal elite. These liberals, they want to, they want to teach their kids whatever they want to. They want to take religion out of the schools. They want to force these social issues down your neck. And Trump is able to say, you know what, for years I had to crawl my way in this society. He's still a billionaire. He still has wants for nothing, but he's able to have that everyone's dumping on me. And he plays that up. That went in a lot of directions, but I think it made a little sense.
Yeah, this makes absolute sense. I think this is very helpful. It seems like one thing that this makes me think about is how much the current time period, maybe U.S. society in general, maybe this is just on the right, but this is a time of anger. So you said at the very beginning, you talked about how vindictive Donald Trump can be. You know, he has this grudge against Rosie O'Donnell for decades, but like, what he's in effect doing is channeling that type of anger or aspect of his personality to match the feeling that people have, which is of anger. But like in a different era. So like, you do talk about this in the book. You talk about Ronald Reagan, but like he's a different era that also probably did something similar. He channeled his energy to make himself fit a certain persona. That's the word I'm often used to using for this kind of idea. But it was a very different persona with a very different feeling. It was a much more, calming and we're going to be great. It was very much not anger because it was a very different era. And so I think that's one thing I was actually, that this made me think about. This is a time of anger that even allowed Donald Trump in particular to rise up based off of these feelings, because otherwise it wouldn't have been able to take root in the way that it did. One question I wanted to ask you, I did actually want to go back to something you said before, which is you said that the first presidency was all, I can't remember the exact words you said, but I'm going to say it was all like reality TV, no substance. And then this presidency, he's starting to move into substance. And it's both reality TV and substance. So, yeah, could you explain that? I wanted to, what is different when Trump adds this substance? How does that make it different in terms of the second presidency?
Well, I think, first of all, you have to say he did, during his first term, do quite a bit he was very effective at some particular things, specifically Supreme Court justices. And he was able to nominate 3 Supreme Court justices that got through. And as a result of that, even if he did nothing else, that has allowed him to do a lot of the things that he's been doing now. So that was one big success he had. And the other big thing he had was, tax cuts for the rich, but, every Republican, it seems, they're able to get those passed. What I think he's doing is he would never say this out loud, but I think he's realized that there are people who who know more about this stuff than he does, and he sort of lets them do it. Like, I think he's saying, like, all right, I hired this guy at Health and Human Services, and even though I don't think Trump really cares about vaccines or not, I assure you he's had his vaccines, that I'm sure he's taken everything possible to avoid COVID. But he said, a big chunk of my people don't want this. And so I'm going to hire this guy, this Kennedy dude, and he's going to dismantle the whole department. And he's like, I don't really care. People can do what they want. I'm just going to let somebody else do this. And so he's sort of just let that happen. And it's the Stephen Miller with immigration. Like, Trump says to be tough on immigration, but I don't think he really cares, especially when if it affects him. Like, if all of a sudden everyone in all of his golf courses had to make sure that all of their immigration papers were in order, I think that would really make him angry. It would make it difficult for him because he loves to hire, he's even said he likes to hire international people over the summertime because they come in and they on summertime visas and they work for cheap at his properties, and then they leave and he doesn't have to deal with them or worry about the taxes. But he hired Stephen Miller, who doesn't want anyone coming into this country. And he says, well, you know what, Steve, you're just sort of in charge of that area, and I'm going to work on the things. And the things he really seems to care about is he wants to have high tea with other heads of state. He wants to, for some odd reason, he wants to meet with teams that he met with the teams that won the World Cup. It wasn't the World Cup, it was the Club Cup, or I don't know, there's too many soccer cups. But they went to the White House, and he stole the trophy. And he's going to put it up somewhere in his house. Like, that's the thing he cares about. But he's hired all these people that really know what they're doing, and they are dismantling. And before he had his feud with Elon Musk, Musk's only problem was he got too loud and said bad things about Trump. If he would have just kept his mouth shut and gone about his business, like, he would have dismantled the government in all the ways that Musk was doing it. So I think that's the key difference. Is he's hired people who people talk about in the first administration. They were there were adults in the room. And this time, it's not that he doesn't have adults in the room, it's that he's just hired adults who have a different ideology, who have an ideology that most people would, that the former adults in the room didn't think would work. I also don't think it would work. But he sort of said, well, I'm just going to work on, if you looked at his last weekend, he went to Scotland and like hung out on his golf course. And while he was there, he imposed some tariffs. Like, that's what he cares about. Golf, tariffs, heads of state. And so the difference between the first time and this time was just that he's hired people that are really good at figuring out where the locuses of power are. Anyway, I don't think locus is the plural of that. But figuring out really where they are and letting them operate sort of without too much interference from him.
Yeah.
I don't know if that answers, but that's the direction I would go.
Yeah, this does make sense. It seems like for you, I agree, though I might add two things to the list of things that he cares about. So other than himself, but in terms of like policy, you mentioned tariffs. Like, I do think you're right. Tariffs seem to be one of the few things, if you look back to public statements decades ago, long before he was a explicit political figure, he would talk about that. So like, it does seem like he has something there that he feels about it. Whether it's a coherent ideology, whether it makes any economic sense aside, he has a perspective there that's not just complete pragmatism. I would probably also add immigration to that, because he has also made statements about that like decades past. That's the one I would probably add to. I do see him as having strong nativistic, anti-immigration, and so he might endorse some of the let's deport everyone a little more for the first example, but then otherwise, yeah, like those are the things, and then the rest of the things he just doesn't care about. I guess. So in terms of from the media perspective, like the first presidency. And also the election and the time before his first term in office, he basically got a firestorm. I mean, he would whip everybody up by saying something controversial, get a lot of attention, and then use that to both promote himself, but also to, get that energy. And then he would give a different narrative to his base and probably play the villain in like a WWE wrestling match. These are all things you talk about in your book. So none of this is new to you. I'm in effect summarizing a couple chapters there. How do you think the media has been responding now? What do you think is similar or different? And what do you think would be like an effective response from a say social media, journalism, from a communication perspective to address this type of tactic of attention seeking that he does?
Yeah, I think that's a question that is. I'll frame it this way. I found myself watching a lot less cable news this time, in part because I don't have to, because I'm not writing about it right now, and I don't think I'm gonna. If I take it up, it'll be in a little while. I need to give it a rest, but partly because like I watched something like Nicole Wallace, who has the show that's on NBC, she's on every afternoon. She's a former Republican, and the people that tend to get the most voices on there are people who are middle of the road, moderate. Often they are also former Republicans. They're never Trumpers, but they still have these sort of basic core sets of like we should respect the process. And if one person is not respecting the process, it's really hard to win by somebody else just trying to play by the rules. If you're playing Monopoly and the person who's the banker keeps taking extra money out of the bank, you're not going to win Monopoly if you just keep rolling and playing by the rules. And so that's one of the things that I think cable news, whether or not cable news matters in 2025, that's a question that I've been thinking a lot about. As I watch it less, I know that MSNBC, one of the reasons that I'll watch it for an afternoon and be like, oh, almost everyone they had on is over, I'm going to say over 50, but it might be over 60. And so and if you watch the ads that are running on MSNBC, they're often geared towards people who are in their 60s, 70s, 80s. Those are probably the people who are watching cable news. And so I've found myself being on Blue Sky a lot more, which some people say is a silo, because it is definitely more left-leaning. And the fights tend to be not between Republican and Democrat, but between liberals and socialists. And sort of, I don't know if that's healthy, the siloing effect. I think it's healthy for me personally, but I don't think that's going to change. Let me just back up and say that I said my next project is not going to be about Trump, but the thing I think I am working on next is something about monoculture and how we've moved away and outside of the monoculture. So I just read this book about the 1968 convention, and they talked about how there were exactly 3 channels that covered it: ABC, NBC, and CBS, and that nobody watched ABC, so nobody cares about that. So really there was 2. And something they were getting ratings where like 60% of the country was watching this. And if 60% of the country is all watching this, and you have journalism that's all buying into this idea of trying to be middle of the road, trying to be not for or against anything, that you can use that to make a populace that is also kind of middle of the road. One of the things that was a characteristic of the U.S. between, say, the end of the war in 1946 and Reagan in 1980 was this pretty much consensus. Like, there were Republicans who were liberal, there were Republicans who were conservative, there were Democrats who were liberal, there were Democrats who were conservative. And they tended to elect people like Eisenhower, who appealed to both sides, or Kennedy, who, while he was big into social programs, was also a very, very warrior. He would be to the right. Johnson, right? Johnson wanted the war to keep going, even as he was he was signing into act civil rights. This all changed first with Reagan in 1980, because Reagan was very much like, I'm going to be conservative. I'm not going to try to play middle of the road. And then especially after the fall of the Soviet Union and after 9/11, we have all these little events that keep moving us into silos that are further and further apart, to the point where we now have this, once we have the internet and social media, I can spend a lot of time, if I don't specifically look for voices of people who are saying things on the far right, I don't have to see them, because we don't have that monoculture. I do watch. I've been staying with my parents for the last couple of weeks. That's why I'm in South Florida right now. And they watch the evening news at 6:30, and I feel like, well, this is such a throwback. And if you just watch that news, you have no idea that all these larger fights that are going on in lots of other different silos. And so I don't think we're ever going to get back to the monoculture we had in the 60s, 70s, and even the 80s. I don't even know if that's a good thing necessarily. But I do think we need to find a way of not siloing ourselves so much that communication becomes impossible between the different branches. That could lead to balkanization, and that balkanization didn't work out when they did that. And I'm really worried that when when Putin leaves, the former Soviet Union will result to a balkanization, and the different regions of Russia will sort of have their own little fiefdoms. And there's some writing about this sort of neo-feudalism, and that's what I tend to be worried about. I know you're going to ask me, well, how do we fix this? And I don't know if I have a good answer. One answer that is, there are a lot of media scholars who think that things like public radio and public television were a good answer to that. Of course, that has been systematically dismantled under Trump. But I also don't really know if that was affecting that many people. As much as I sort of think it's a really good thing that we have these things, because, I was sort of taught with these liberal values, I don't know if public media will do it. I think what we need is people who are just going to be are going to be able to be good orators. Yeah, I mean, again, I really don't know if I have the answer to this, and there's part of me that says maybe we're too far gone. But I'll say this: I think there's two schools of thought. There's one that sort of has this idea of there must be a tipping point. There must be at some point where Trump does something that goes too far, and then there's a swing back to the other direction. I keep hoping for this. I keep thinking like, oh, he was BFF with a pedophile. That ought to do it. There's a famous internet meme. Well, old Donnie's got himself into a jam this time, and then he says, well, nevertheless, every time he gets out of the jam, he finds a way. The other thing is sort of grassroots activism, which is definitely happening. The fact that on Trump's birthday, when everyone got out into the streets, like there were a lot of people who weren't normally motivated by politics who were out on the streets for Trump's birthday, or to protest Trump's birthday, to protest him having a military parade. And the military parade seems sad on that. And it's going to take some either person or organization to be able to harness that kind of energy and turn that into real politics. The worry is that they're going to put their finger on the scale so much on the other side with things like what they're doing right now in terms of redistricting and things they're doing with the Supreme Court. They're going to make it so like, oh, no matter how big of a movement you have, that if you try to still use the levers of power that are in the U.S. constitutional democracy, that they just won't work. Mm-hmm. So that's the terrifying. It's like the worst answer is, oh, what's going to happen is then if the levers of power just don't work, then that's when people resort to non-democratic means. So the thing I've been reading a lot about is liberalism with a lowercase l, and like what does it mean to live in a liberal society? And by that I mean a society that has multiple voices, that of multiple types of people can all live together in a way that's not to divorce liberalism from being something that's just the Democrats think, but like that most of the U.S. Republic was based upon sort of liberalism, and having checks and balances on that. So that's what I worry. If I worry about it the most, I think, oh, it's going to come to anti-liberal means, which often involves violence, and I'm not a big fan.
Yeah. So everything you're saying makes total sense. I mean, definitely the thing you were saying at the end of maybe aspects of the system are so rigged right now with gerrymandering and with the Supreme Court that everything won't change. That's kind of worst case scenario, that because then the only forms of change involve like fundamentally changing the system, and that could be very scary. I wanted to talk about two aspects of what you said at the beginning that will seem to not relate to what you're saying at the end, but I think there is a connection. You said at the beginning, you were like, you haven't been watching as much about what's been going on with like the latest with Donald Trump. You're like, partially this was you. You're like, you're not researching it proper, like in the same way anymore. But I think, that statement about you as an individual, that's an overall pattern that I've seen in the United States. I think people, the first, 2016, you got a huge media boom because a lot of people were trying to figure out what the devil was going on. And that was, I'm thinking particularly people on the moderate and on the left side. And now many, at least, like, I don't have any empirical data on this, but at least the people I know, the people I talk to, my friends and family, people are a lot more just burnt out, and they're much more retreatist. They're much more, just screw it. It's over there and I don't want to deal with it. And that's an overall pattern. It seems to be not just you. But then that's one trend I'm seeing the second time around. The other trend, you talked about news channels kind of emphasizing the voice of, I'm going to use the word moderate conservative. Another scholar that I interviewed, that an anthropologist, Kyle Morrison, who studies that group, that's what he calls them. But like things like never Trumpers or now anti-Trumpers, they you talked about them being emphasized in cable news. I've seen this trend across um, other types of channels. So, like many, in my experience, I'll give two examples of two big, generally left-leaning media publications: The Atlantic and Vox. If you look at who they're interviewing, they are interviewing many people who are either moderate or moderate conservative. They're interviewing many people who either have been never Trumpers or who are now anti-Trumpers. And by that, maybe a good example, I was just last night listening to an interview from The Atlantic with Tom Bolton, who was in the Trump administration, but is now a very vocal critic of the Trump administration. So that's a good example of an anti-Trumper, as is maybe even someone who was very much like endorsed the Trump system and has now had a falling out and could even have endorsed it to the point of being a very active part of it. And it seems like what I've been seeing in terms of, I guess, monocultures, assuming I'm using the word correctly for how you understand it, is I'm seeing the formation of three different groups. So you have the right and you have the left, which maybe tend to be progressive, like the further left. I'm thinking like progressive, socialist, that kind of group, and media ecosystems are being built for both. And then you're starting. I feel like I'm starting to see a lot of liberals in the more regular sense of the word kind of coalescing with moderate conservatives to form a type of maybe moderate group. And this could be, to use your word, it could be liberal with a lowercase L. That word might confuse people, so I generally will use the word moderate, because regular people, it's the type of liberal you're talking about, the tradition coming out of like John Stuart Mill and Locke and all those people. So it's a different sense of the word liberal, so that might confuse people. So I'm going to use the word moderate. So you're going to see, I've been seeing like a right, a moderate, and a liberal group kind of slowly emerging. And it's like before the progressives and the liberals were kind of in one group, but it's like the middle is getting more defined as a distinct group that's now including moderate conservatives, because many on the further left are saying, no, we shouldn't, like, this is bad, these people, we also disagree with them very strongly too. And I also I am reminded of like the work of there's the philosopher Tai Nugent, who talks about, oh God, I hope I'm not I might be switching the words because he has a key distinction between them, but he talks about like epistemological bubbles and then echo chambers. So epistemological bubbles to him just kind of form. It's like these people tend to interact with each other, so they tend to have more interaction. So their ideologies, if you're in that, you're more likely to interact with the people in that group. But like you still have engagement with other people. Whereas echo chambers is a much more, maybe use the examples in your book, those Fox News shows like Sean Hannity and this and that. Like this would be an echo chamber where it's like they explicitly define themselves and they talk about the other perspectives, but they do so in a way that reinforces the narrative of the group. So they'll say like this, the conservatives radio or television host will be like, they'll talk about liberal perspectives, but it's a very like, these liberals, they're bad, they're dangerous. It's in a way that kind of reinforces the group. And I love to hear your thoughts on, like, to me, that seems to be partially in play with the monocultures. It's not like everything is the same and everyone thinks the same thing. They actively think about other people, but they do so in a very biased way. And that kind of reinforces the group. What are your thoughts?
First of all, if you can send me the link to whoever wrote that difference between epistemological bubbles and echo chambers, because that sounds fascinating to me. I want to read more about that.
I will, and I'll include it in the description for anyone listening as well. Keep going.
Wonderful, because that sounds like something that's right up my alley. I think you're totally right about this. Starting with John Bolton, like you're old, I'm old enough to remember when disliking John Bolton when he was part of the Bush administration, and he was the biggest proponent of war. And the Bush, he was a big neocon, and they put him in at as the head of the UN, kind of as a middle finger to the UN, because basically he wanted to say, like, I don't believe in the UN. I want to get rid of it. So I have always had a strong dislike for him. And I hate it when people like Nicole Wallace have him on their show, because, I just don't trust him, and still have a hard time trusting the neocons in general. But the people who are the neocons in the 2000s tend to be some of the most vocal anti-Trump, what you would call moderates. The Bulwark is the publication that people are really into right now, and Bill Kristol runs that one, and Bill Kristol's dad was one of the first neocons, and he was a neocon, and those type of people. I'm coming around to it's interesting that group, you think that they might be developing their own thing, and I wonder if like they would then have their own type of political candidate. One can imagine a race, a presidential race that had three kind of middle of the road, left and right. Our system doesn't work real well with that, but it has in the past done some of those types of things. For example, you could say in the 1968 election, the center, Richard Nixon took the center, Hubert Humphrey took the left, and George Wallace took the right. And that was, you could also say in the 1980 election, John Anderson took the center, Jimmy Carter took the left, and Ronald Reagan took the right. So there's definitely been times when it's happened, but it's been a minute, and I don't know if we're quite ready for that. One person who I think, if he ever was to speak out about this, their king would be someone like George Herbert Walker Bush. Not Herbert Walker, George Walker Bush, G-Dub, because he could speak to that. He would then become the pendulum has moved so far that he is all of a sudden the voice of centrism when he used to be the voice of the far right. And I hate to say that. I find the same thing about the Atlantic, though. I was thinking, when I was on Twitter, I didn't get blocked by too many people, but Tom Nichols blocked me because I kept arguing with him over him being wrong a lot. So I don't know if you know Tom Nichols, but he's one of their big guys over there at the Atlantic. Those are just some thoughts I have on that three-pronged system. If we were to, there are certainly some advantages to a parliamentary style system, which is a direction that could go if we did have big social change. But I will also remind people that Hitler came to power exactly because the parliamentary system couldn't have a majority and nobody could figure out what they wanted, and he just decided to take it. And it was exactly those moderate conservatives that he was able to pull to his side by sheer force of his personality and by scapegoating the communists on the left. I'm sorry, you had a second part of that question. Will you remind me where that second part went?
Yeah. Well, I actually forgot what the second part was, but I'm going to kind of switch questions and be like, how do you think, just a quick thought there on what you're saying with the three-part system, you are right. If our society is having an overall three-part system, and that's obviously an oversimplification because there's tons of different subgroups, actual U.S. politics is bipart, two parts. And so that means that two of those parts are going to probably actually, quote unquote, win and being able to generally present candidates, be able to win the presidential candidate, and then only one of them will be able to win any given election. So there'll be a type of winnowing in a competition that I think you're hinting at. I guess a question I was going to ask you was, how do you think, what do you think would be, how do you think in this current age, how do you think people who want to see a better world, who want this basically, who are, I guess I'll use the word the left broadly, but this could be, I guess, in what I'm saying, I guess I'm thinking the further left, but this could also be moderates. Because right now the right is, under Donald Trump, is winning the airwaves. How do you think people can win the airwaves in this day and age?
I do think you have to have a certain ability to make a spectacle. I think about when Cory Booker went and did his 24-hour filibuster, but then he didn't back that up. Like the next day, he voted on something that was, giving into Trump. I'm a big fan of AOC. I've been a big fan of her since she came into Congress, and she has an ability to speak clearly about issues, but also to use social media, to use the voice, speak in such a way that sort of a plain person might speak. There's an argument that says, well, maybe the best person for this, and it's sort of terribly depressing, but if you can find an older white dude who can have the same principles, maybe that's how you win. So it's a Tim Walz or a Pritzker. But all of those people are dynamic personalities that I just met. So you need to have someone that's going to have some kind of dynamic. I think that the age of having Chuck Schumers of the world, I hate to pick on him, but he's just such an easy target. Because he has zero charisma. That's not how he won. That you're going to have to see people who have a little bit of fight. And you can watch even someone like when Pete Buttigieg ran in 2016. He ran as a very soft-spoken person, and since then, in the last 8 years, he's been going on to Fox News and actually taking the ideas to the opposition, and the left has taken note. He used to be seen as sort of persona non grata by the left, and now it's like, oh, well, maybe he could form a coalition. And I think that's the key word. Is what you need to do is you need to build a coalition. And we're right now at the point where people are trying to figure out what that looks like. I'm just enough into sort of the left-leaning part of Blue Sky to say that there's just a lot of people who will never vote for Gavin Newsom because of how he's dealt with unhoused folk in California and how he's dealt with his ideas on trans people. Same with Emmanuel, who used to be mayor of Chicago and was in Obama's administration, who was also taken to it. You need to find someone who's going to be able to not throw marginalized people under the bus, at the same time speaking to people for whom marginalized people are not necessarily part of their everyday life. This is going back to something you said. You said that this was the part of the question that I couldn't remember that I wanted to respond to. You said that I have taken some time off of social media, and especially the more darker parts like Fox News and Twitter. And I'll say that the thing you said is, what that creates is it creates a kind of numbing effect where you're sort of numb to everything. Well, another bad thing happened. But that's only possible to divorce yourself from it if it's not interacting with your everyday lives. There are everyday people for whom trans laws are being shifted in ways that are making their lives worse. There are people for whom the ICE are coming to their house or to their baseball games and are evicting them. So to take some time off to breathe is very much a position of privilege. And so it's something that as I start, hopefully once I get a job once I find myself on my feet in terms of employment a little bit more, I'm going to be working on figuring out, all right, well, how can I start to work for those groups of people who are the most marginalized, because they don't have the opportunity to take the time off. And so that's the coalition we need. We need a coalition of the people who are marginalized and the people who care about the marginalized. And you need to hope that group of people is bigger than the people who don't care about marginalized people. And that's where I have just enough in my sort of bleeding heart to think that I do think more people do care about poor people, unhoused people, trans folks, LGBT folks of all kind, minorities in this country, that hopefully if the right leaders could form that coalition. Obama was really good at it. He did it from left of center kind of position, but I don't think it needs to be from that exact position. Anyone who can build that coalition, I think, would be able to find a way to win.
Yeah, this makes total sense. And you are right that retreatism is a privilege, and it's for many people, particularly people who are marginalized in various ways. The powers that be almost come knocking on their door and prevent the ability to retreat. They invade their space. And people who can retreat are disproportionately people who have the ability to have a space separate that isn't being actively invaded in that way. I also think you're right. I mean, the irony of the pragmatist in me, as much as I would hate to say it, but like an older white guy might actually, who has a strong charisma, might be the most pragmatic way to develop a popularity across the population. As unfortunate as that is, given just given the how much that buys into things like racism and sexism, but in terms of being effective, that might be what is most effective. And I think the irony is, I mean, you're almost, maybe not, but you made me think about Bernie Sanders. So like, he might be too old, whatever. Don't have to go down that rabbit trail, but like a Bernie Sanders take two of a white guy who talks about these issues. At the same time, I also agree with you that I tend to think talking about economic issues is probably what's going to be most effective across the wide swath of people, maybe particularly working class Americans. I mean, that was something Donald Trump was actually successful at, was dipping into how they felt. And economic issues are, for what you were saying, communities that don't have a lot of minorities in that sense, is still something that galvanizes them, because across the board, we're seeing many people in the U.S. are seeing their life prospects go down, and seeing their options diminish. And being able to tap into that might be the most pragmatic starting place. One thing I'm curious about with the coalition building, I don't know to what extent I actually agree with this argument, but a common argument around Donald Trump is that Trump was effective. Trump did his stuff, built his following with no coalition building, that he focused in on his one group and then built out from that. And then the Democrats tried coalition building and it failed as a response. I guess what do you think about that? To what extent do you think that's accurate? And to what extent do you agree with kind of the, how would you respond to someone who said, I don't think coalition building is the effective strategy, we need to hunker our own, or something like that kind of response? What do you think about that?
I think you're right that if there ever was someone who didn't care about coalition building, it's been Trump. There's been very few moments in his 5+ years of being president, or almost 5 years of being president, where he's had a positive approval rating. He's almost always underwater on approval rating. So that means that he lost 2 of the 3 elections by the popular vote, and didn't get a majority in the 3rd election. He's taking the people that are the most rabid. He's going for a smaller pond, but the fish are really big in the sense that they're voracious and they want to eat on the line. I guess I wonder if there's enough on the other side to do that. If the number, it definitely is possible, because really these elections always come down to, I mean, at least since the last time we had a true kind of landslide election was 96. I guess the first Obama was pretty much a landslide, but that had all kinds of other factors with, we were in a recession and wars, and there was some 8 years of pretty terrible before that. But for the most part, you're playing into the same few states, right? It's Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin. And I've lived so much of my life in swing states that like I've seen it. But like for example, I just moved from Wisconsin, and Wisconsin was a total swing state. And this is the thing that the Democrats need to do is I watch a lot of I still watch a lot of like regular TV that had regular ads, and I was in not only was I in a swing state, but I was in a swing district, and the Democrats weren't running ads about how bad the big bill, beautiful bill was 24/7. Like, and the cynic in me thinks, well, the Democrats actually didn't care if that bill passed because then they could run against it in 2 years. And it's that kind of thinking that makes people really not want to be part of that party because they're not really interested in these issues. They're more interested in their self-preservation. I know that that's what Trump does, but it doesn't seem to translate on the left side of things. So what we need to do is you need to be someone who wants to fight not just every 2 years, but wants to fight all the time. And the Republicans seem to be really good at that. I did notice today, though, that Chuck Grassley was putting a hold on some Bush nominations because he's fed up with the Iowa gets a lot of their energy from wind these days, and Trump wants to get rid of the wind, not the whole wind, but just the windmills and the wind turbines. And so he's putting a hold on something. And so he doesn't need to care because he doesn't have to worry about re-election because he's 95 or whatever. I don't know how old he is, but I think he's over 90. But those are the moments. It's like, all right, if you can start fighting at times that aren't 2 years from now, that's what's going to really start to get into people. And Bernie Sanders did this well before his campaign, right? So he ran in 2006, but he had been appearing on Meet the Press for a decade before that, right? And oftentimes seen as like, we have this crazy socialist guy who's mayor of Burlington. He's going to be on our show. And you need more people who are willing to do that. Even Cory Booker, who a lot of people think is a centrist shill. I don't know. I wouldn't say that about him. But like, I've known him because he used to do the shows and he did them as the mayor of Newark. And, like, oh, like this guy, he's running for president, but right now he's just mayor of Newark. So you need to find those kinds of people who are willing to do traditional media and also be big on social media and maybe have a meme about yourself and maybe do TikTok. And I don't know if that person exists. So I don't know.
Yeah.
I just got cynical at the end there.
This makes total sense. I think one element of this, and I think is you've actually been hinting at it throughout our conversation, but this type of thing you just described of being able to do the fight, of being able to talk the talk in a social media in this current social media landscape, to be able to do this to this type of activity, this kind of, we'll say, reality TV show, controlling the airwaves, like whatever it is, however you want to describe it. There's all sorts of nuances there. It's a skill set. And skill sets need to be cultivated because you really did pick on him, but I'll maintain it to pick on the Chuck Schumers of the world. I think part of the discrepancy there is that they, over the course of their career, have built a different set of skill sets, and this is one set of skill sets. So you need to look. It takes time to develop a skill set. I mean, even like biographically in your book with Donald Trump, like you talk about how Trump spent decades in doing WWE, doing The Apprentice, navigating the tabloid world of New York City, all these different things that built this skill set over time, and then how the current Twitter and all this stuff is him manifesting that skill set in a new social media like Twitter. But like, it's a skill set, and we might, especially for high office like president, might need to look to people who have had the ability to cultivate that skill set, because it takes time, and it seems like it's the skill set that it's part of the skill set we need. It's like if there was a resume or if there was a job application for president and you're like, here are the qualifications, it's now one of the qualifications. What do you think?
Yeah, I really like the idea of building a skill set. And I think a smart politician would be trying to build the chops on both the social media side and the traditional media side, so
Right.
they could do that. And so, like, I think I pointed to Buttigieg. I think what he's doing is a really good job of making himself remembered, even though he's not, he's out of office. He's no longer the transportation secretary. But like, oh, he keeps talking. He shows up on my social media, and he shows up. My mom, I'm living with my parents. My mom watches The View every day. He shows up on shows like that. So you need to do the traditional media, but also have the media savvy. Is another possibility that maybe it's just someone, and this has always been kind of the Hail Mary, at least since Reagan, when like, oh, well, what if a movie star was president? And Reagan's like, yeah, we did that. And Trump's like, what if a reality star was president? And like, yeah, we did that. It's like, oh, so that's when, like when Trump ran for president the first time in 2000, he had floated the idea of Oprah Winfrey as his running mate. And people have wanted Oprah to run forever. And I'm sure there's lots of reasons why she wouldn't want that. But the idea of like, oh, well, maybe it's just somebody who's not a politician who people who are love. And so I could imagine a situation where someone like a Taylor Swift comes out and says, hey, I'm going to run for, maybe she'd run for senator of Tennessee first or whatever, but like someone who comes out of, that we're not seeing from the political world, but comes from the era of entertainment, Taylor Swift obviously knows how to deal with social media. She obviously knows how to deal with large crowds. She obviously knows how to deal with all of the cultivating a persona, to use the term you used. She might not have the political chops, but there might be someone who, if not her, someone like her who's able to make the move, who's able to have those political chops. And we wouldn't necessarily see it coming, although I have heard people talk about Taylor Swift in political circles.
There you
go. That would be a book I'd write.
Maybe if in 2 years' time or 3 years' time Taylor Swift is the running mate, we're gonna say you called it. If that happens, I mean, the way Donald Trump run the Super Bowl in effect politicized Taylor Swift. I would love if that's one of the actual that's kind of an indirect result of that. Another name I've heard, though I don't know about this particular person, but I will sometimes hear of all people like The Rock, so Dwayne Johnson, as mentioned in this context. He also does have a WWE background, so that has that certain type of reality TV. You cultivating a persona, and that's I guess like Donald Trump in that sense. But yeah, I guess as a final question, I'm going to ask a bit of a fun question, because we've been talking about so many deep and difficult things. You mentioned that you liked that recently you were watching reality TV that in this case you seemed like you actually liked it, like you weren't just doing it for research because you had to or something. What were some of your favorite moments recently in the that you've been watching that kind of made you think or made you in the reality TV space that weirdly might connect to what we've been talking about cultivating personas?
That's a good question. Maybe I'll start with my favorite reality show I like is Temptation Island. I don't know if you've ever seen it. One could argue that I like it. The premise is you take groups of ostensibly happy couples who then are separated into a boys' side or a men's side and a woman's side, and then in each of those venues, a bevy of model-looking people of the opposite gender are there to tempt them, and they're plied with alcohol, and they go out on dates, and sure enough, every time, at least half of the people cheat on their partners. Why do I like this? I think it really gets at something that I'll see if I can tie this a little bit to the realm of politics. I like it because I watch these people and I think every one of these people is terrible. Like, I think one way of watching that is saying every one of these people is terrible. Aren't you glad I'm not like that? But I don't think that. I think it's like, oh, every one of these people is terrible, but what really, it's not that they're terrible, it's that they just don't really know what they want. When they're presented with a different option, when you go out on a date with somebody new and you put alcohol in front of them and you're on a beautiful desert island and the person you're with is wearing their bathing suit, it's like, oh, well, this is, maybe people are just attracted to sort of the very, very most superficial of things more than anything else. And so, that show really gets to me. I'd love to watch Love Island more because it has similar kinds of things of people getting together and being it. It just has too many episodes and they were like 3 hours long. But yeah, I think the thing that I take from reality TV that comes from wrestling is that people love the heel. That people love the bad guy. Trump plays the heel so well. Which is sort of amazing that he is giving all the props to Hulk Hogan, because Hulk Hogan never played the heel until in his real life when he turned out he was a terrible human being. But in the wrestling world, he was always the blonde Florida man who was going to save the day from the Iron Sheik or whatever, whatever racist trope they were going to throw at him, and he was going to win handily. I don't know if you knew this, but here in Florida, they had the flags at half-mast on a few days ago for his passing. But I wonder what a heel on the left looks like. How can you be a heel and also try to be on the side of marginalized people, right? Because it seems like the people who are the most marginalized don't want to be that if you're mean, then it just becomes cruel. And Trump's fans, well, I don't know, maybe they like the cruelness. I think people like cruelty. And maybe I'm coming across as like, oh, my faith in human nature is gone. But like when I watch reality television, I always root for the bad guys. I always root for the heels. I root for the people on Temptation Island. I root for everyone to cheat on their partners because I think that makes for better TV. In real life, like I think cheating is bad and we shouldn't do that. And that I try to live my life according to certain, I'll take an Aristotelian view of like, I'm going to live my life according to certain principles in order to become a better person. But in my reality TV show, like I want the worst thing possible. But I think maybe that's one of the reasons. And I think that's one of the reasons people are drawn to Trump is because he's the worst thing possible. I literally cannot imagine a worse person to be president. Like doesn't seem like a good human. He doesn't seem like he knows politics. He doesn't seem particularly smart or curious or adventuresome or and even things like you find out things like his favorite meal is a well-done steak with ketchup on it. Like just everything about him is like, oh, I just dislike this person. But I also, from the very beginning, found him compelling. I went to a Trump rally in 2015, maybe 16. It was summer, so I bet it was 2015. And just I was sort of shocked by the sheer amount of visceral reaction he got. If I can, and like the amount of hatred that people felt and how good it felt to be when there's a part in his standard stump speech where he introduces the media and everyone boos and tells them it swears at them and tells them to fuck off. That's the part they like the most. That's the red meat that they're getting. And last summer I went to a Harris Walls rally. I think it might have been one of their first ones they did together. So they were still very happily in the honeymoon stage of the campaign. But the vibe was so much more cheerful and happy, and then they lost by a lot. So maybe cheerful and happy is not what you want at your political rallies. That's a terrible way to end.
There you go. I will say. Well, real quick at the beginning, if I had to guess a reality TV show you would pick, I would not have guessed Temptation Island. I was just that wasn't even in the wheelhouse of where I would have guessed. But I will say, I understand where you're coming from with the show. I think the closest I can think of to a connection to this is it makes me think about how fickle voters can be. I mean, voting is like. In a way, it's like a 4 or 8 year marriage. But the problem is people's voting decisions are even more superficial and just kind of how they feel that day than anything like marriage or dating or something that we would take seriously. I mean, I guess if it's only 4 or 8 years, maybe that's closer to dating than marriage. But like, yeah, we get enticed by nice looking bodies, and then we vote for that, and then we get that, and we're like, oh. And that's in the way metaphorically saying something that's happening with Donald Trump. With the heel idea, I do think you're right. I think one of the ironies, it's a very good question what a left leaning heel would look like. I mean, the two closest things I could think of is satire, which can be very popular on the left, that could look like, hey, this is the problem, and like there can be very satiric descriptions that are very like bad or like, but that kind of play into that type of heel. Like of all examples, the Alec Baldwin's character in 30 Rock might be a weird example that like his character was beloved. It was a satire of a left leaning satire of capitalism and conservatism. But he was a very popular character because of it. The other thing it does make me think about is, I mean, you did hint at this, but like heels, including in WWE, often are minorities. And many times, not only are they appealing characters, but they can be specifically appealing to people in that group, because it's not only, in some cases, there can be not good representation, so that can be some of the major forms of representation for those groups, but also because they're just very flamboyant personalities. I mean, one example I'm thinking of is that Little Mermaid, the villain, Ursula. Who was in the whatever in the live action, but in the original was very much modeled off of a lot of who did they model her as a character off of? But a lot of different, like a lot of people in the queer community and maybe specifically in the trans really gravitate towards her, and that was a basis. A lot of I'm blanking. There was like one or two famous people that she was specifically modeled off of, but
was it like Divine or something like that?
Yeah, it could have been. Oh well, someone could look this up. It's not that hard to find out. But like, people saw her as a depiction of that kind of drag. She and like really in that space really loved her as a character because she was both flamboyant, she was a heel, she had a strong personality, but also because like they saw aspects of that in her, even though she was the villain. And you know, there's critiques there, like why is the trans character the villain? But at the same time, people gravitate towards her for this exact energy. And I don't know how to translate that politically. Maybe that isn't translatable in terms of politics, and maybe that's because that's a almost like a subculture that liked her and not able to be built in a mainstream way. Maybe not. Maybe there's a way that I'm not thinking about. But that was just kind of two early thoughts I had. But yeah. I guess so. Yeah. Any parting thoughts to close this out on?
No, well, I think this is a really interesting conversation. And it's good for me to get my brain working this way. As I told you, I sort of put this stuff down. I've been reading a lot of books about decades and thinking about decadization, and it eventually comes back to this. But it's good to get my mind thinking through the contemporary politics, and maybe this means that I do believe in grassroots activism. So it means that now that I've moved to a new state, once I get my feet on the ground a little bit, I should be working with on the ground resources. I've in the past worked with here in Florida. I worked with a abortion clinic. I was an escort at the abortion clinic, and so I think that any way you can find to get involved with those kinds of things is good and is helpful, because I think especially now people really need as much help as they can get. And then I also want to figure out, like, all right, who's going to run against my representative here, who's a total MAGA person, and she comes from the world of, I think she comes from the adult industry in some ways. Not that that's not a good reason to be in politics, but anyways, in closing, I would say that I really do believe that grassroots politics are good in terms of helping people. How to get that to translate to larger political wins is something that Obama was able to do, and we need to figure out, like, well, if Obama could do it, then other people could do it, and so maybe move from there. So thank you. It was really fun talking to you, and I hope me not being an anthropologist wasn't too much of a difficulty.
Oh, anthropologists are not the only important people in the world. But thank you so much for taking the time. I hope in your new place you're able to get to connect to grassroots mobilizing. Maybe that's our main way of, as we're forming these monocultures in society, especially in social media. Maybe grassroots is one of the best, tried and true ways to actually talk to people from other perspectives and start to form connections that aren't within our monoculture, and start to actually form bridges as the media landscapes is separating us. But yes, thanks for taking the time, and I guess I hope you have a good rest of your hot summer, and as you prepare for this new chapter in your life.
Thanks. Well, thank you very much for having me